The Pacific sky at noon looks like glass, blue, endless, and cruel. January 14, 1944. North coast of New Guinea. 23-year-old Lieutenant Jack Garrison pushes his P-38 Lightning through thin white clouds, engines howling in sync. The air vibrates so hard his teeth buzz. Below him, jungle sprawls like a green ocean. Above, 6 tiny black dots spreading out like fangs. Zeros. 6 of them. His wingman's voice cracks over the radio. "They're on us, Jack. 6 high, 3 left." Then static. A second later, a bloom of fire, his wingman gone. Jack's alone, 6 against 1 at 14,000 feet. Every instinct says dive and run. But the Zeros are already sliding into formation, closing the noose. He glances at the fuel gauge. Barely a third tank. He's too far from base, too low for cover, and too slow to climb. He mutters under his breath. "Well, hell, guess we dance." The first burst rips past his canopy, silver streaks of tracer fire. The right engine coughs, one bullet cutting through the cowl. Jack jerks the yoke left, trying to break the pattern, but the Zeros anticipate every move, tight, surgical, practiced. He feels the heat rising in the cockpit, smell of fuel and sweat mixing. He's out of options. And then, he does something insane. He pulls both throttles back to near idle. The roar dies. Silence, except for wind screaming over the wings. The Lightning's nose dips, wobbling like a dying bird. From above, the Zeros see a stalled American fighter. Easy kill. They roll in together for the kill shot. But Jack isn't stalling. He's faking it. What happens in the next 10 seconds will change air combat forever. By early 1944, American fighters were bleeding in the Pacific. For every Zero that went down, 3 Allied pilots never came home. The myth of the Japanese ace wasn't propaganda, it was math. The A6M0 was light, agile, and built for close-quarters dogfights. The P-38 Lightning, fast on paper, was a 2-engine giant with the turning radius of a truck. U.S. doctrine said, stay in formation, stay fast, don't cut power. But out here, rules meant nothing. Pilots who obeyed them died fast. And the air smelled like burnt magnesium and fear. Lieutenant Mike "Hopper" Davis died 3 weeks before Garrison's flight. Tried to outturn a Zero at low altitude. His plane shuddered, stalled, and fell, radio screaming all the way down. They never found him, just a patch of burned canopy and one melted pistol grip. Sergeant Eli Moreno lasted another week. His right engine took a hit, and when he tried to roll out, the plane snapped in half mid-air. Witnesses said it looked like someone had cut the sky open with scissors. The Pacific didn't care how good you were. It only cared how fast you burned. And still, command insisted, never reduce power in combat. The Lightning needed airflow to stay alive. Without it, one wing would lose lift and drop into a spin. Pilots joked that stall was just code for "you're dead," but somewhere on a mud-slick runway in New Guinea, one quiet pilot started asking dangerous questions. Jack Garrison wasn't the type you noticed. He wasn't an ace, not a leader, not the guy giving orders in the briefing tent. He was the awkward Kansas kid who'd been flying crop dusters before the war. Low, slow, steady hands. His commander called him Farmer Jack. Others called him Crash. He didn't talk much, didn't brag, didn't drink hard. But he watched, and he noticed something no one else did. Every time a Lightning truly stalled, the Japanese pilots rushed in too soon, assuming the kill was theirs. And almost every time, they overshot. Because the Zero was so light it couldn't dive fast enough to stay behind a falling plane. Jack began to wonder, what if you could fake a stall, make them commit, and then snap back alive before they knew what happened. He mentioned it once quietly to his squadmate. The guy laughed so hard he choked on his cigarette. "You cut throttle in combat, you'll spin into the damn ocean, Jack. You'll die before they even shoot." Maybe so, but Jack couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, while others were playing poker in the mess tent, he was alone by his plane, lantern light flickering on the aluminum skin, mosquitoes humming around his face. He ran his hand down the leading edge of the wing, feeling the metal's cool sweat. He whispered, "You and me, girl. Let's figure this out." He wasn't thinking about glory or medals. He just wanted his crew to stop dying. He started experimenting in secret. At dawn, before anyone else was up, he'd taxi the P-38 down the strip and take her up alone. He played with the throttles, cut one, then both, then brought them back. He learned that if he pulled back just enough, the plane looked like it was stalling, nose down, wings trembling, but there was still air under her, still lift. He practiced rudder taps to mimic the shudder of a real stall, tapped left, right, left so the tail shook convincingly. The first time, the Lightning actually did stall. The nose dropped hard, the world flipped upside down, and he barely recovered before hitting the treetops. He landed, heart hammering, legs shaking so bad he couldn't climb out of the cockpit. But he smiled, because for a few seconds, the illusion had worked. Next time he went higher. He reduced power unevenly, right engine low, left engine mid, so the nose yawed just enough to fool the eye. He added a quick dive, then a throttle slam to regain control. By the fourth attempt, he could fake a stall so perfectly even the ground crew thought he'd lost control. One mechanic ran out waving a rag, shouting, "You're gonna get yourself court-martialed, Jack!" Jack just winked. "Not if I live first." He kept notes in a tiny logbook hidden under the seat cushion. Fake stall test 5. Slight left yaw, both throttles, idle 4 seconds, re-engage full power 2 seconds, recovery clean. He called it the ghost fall. No one else knew it existed. By the time his next mission rolled around, the 475th Fighter Group had lost 12 men in 2 weeks. Morale was gone. They were escorting bombers over the coast. Routine, they said. Nothing about that sky was routine. At 0800 hours, they took off in formation, engines thundering over the mangroves. Jack's plane carried a faint scar along the fuselage from a past fight. He rubbed it for luck. Halfway to target, the enemy found them, 6 Zeros out of Rabaul, diving from the sun. Within seconds, the formation broke apart, radios filled with static and panic. Jack's wingman screamed, "We're cut off!" Then, silence, and the sky emptied except for the 6 shapes above him. He was alone. He knew the odds, but this was the exact scenario he'd been preparing for, the trap where the trapper thinks you're prey. He leveled the wings, took one breath, then slowly pulled both throttles back. The P-38's twin engines dropped to a whisper. The airspeed bled off. The plane began to sink, nose forward, wings quivering. To the Zeros above, it looked perfect, an American bird falling out of the fight. The Japanese leader barked a command. "Dive! Finish him!" 6 Zeros rolled over as one, fanning out like claws. Jack waited, heartbeats counting in silence. 2, 3, 4. Then he slammed both throttles forward, hard. Engines howled to life, and the sky exploded. The P-38 jolted forward like a slingshot. The sudden thrust pinned Jack to his seat. His vision tunneled, black creeping at the edges, but the Lightning roared back to life. The 6 Zeros committed to their dive couldn't pull up fast enough. They streaked past him, one by one, caught in their own momentum. Jack rolled the Lightning upside down, sighted through the gun sight and squeezed the trigger. 4 nose guns and 1 20mm cannon thundered as one. The recoil kicked his shoulders. The smell of cordite filled the cockpit. Tracer rounds carved through the leading Zero's fuselage. A burst of orange flame. The plane disintegrated, fragments spiraling into the sea. Jack jerked left, nearly blacking out. 2 more Zeros overshot, pulling vertical. He chased the nearest, slipped under its tail and fired again, short, disciplined bursts. Metal shredded. The second Zero caught fire, spinning like a torch before vanishing into the clouds below. He counted 4 still alive. The third enemy looped behind him, guns blazing. Bullets raked across the Lightning's left wing, ripping open panels. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the canopy like blood. Jack slammed the rudder, dropped flaps halfway, forcing a sudden drift. The Zero overshot again. He had 2 seconds of clear aim. 2 seconds was all he needed. He fired. The enemy burst into a glowing streak, diving nose first into the jungle. 3 down, Jack whispered. His throat was raw, sweat stung his eyes. But the last 3 Zeros regrouped, coordinated, disciplined like wolves circling a wounded bull. They attacked from 3 angles, high, low, behind. Jack could feel the Lightning's frame trembling under the strain. He kicked rudder left, right, pushing the engines to full power. He was at 300 knots now, diving straight for the deck. Bullets ripped through the tail. Warning lights blinked red. The stick felt heavy as stone. He whispered again. "Come on, girl. One more trick." At 2,000 feet, he pulled the throttles back, again. The sudden silence returned. The plane nosed down, wobbling as if dying. The Japanese leader, believing him finished, closed in for the final shot. Jack waited until he could see the red circles on the Zero's wings. Then, full power, hard right roll, nose up. The Lightning arced behind the Zero in one impossible motion. Gunfire flashed. The 4th Zero burst apart in midair. The remaining 2 scattered, one pulling left, one climbing straight for the sun. Jack didn't chase. He'd won the moment he convinced them he was already dead. He banked hard toward the coastline. Fuel was low. His right engine coughed and sputtered, leaking dark smoke. He radioed base, voice shaking. Lightning 2-3 returning. 6 bandits engaged. 4 confirmed down, 1 probable. Static. Then the reply. "Say again, Garrison. 6? 6, he said, and then quieter. The trick works. By the time he landed, his landing gear barely held together. The ground crew ran toward the smoking aircraft, mouths open. The left wing looked shredded. Half the nose panel was gone, and yet the Lightning still sat there, breathing smoke, but alive. Jack slid out of the cockpit, collapsed on the tarmac and laughed, half hysteria, half disbelief. The mechanic knelt beside him. "What the hell did you do up there?" Jack just smiled, wiped the blood off his chin and said, "I pretended to die." That night, pilots gathered around him in the mess tent, passing a flask of whiskey and wide-eyed questions. "What do you mean, fake a stall? Cut both throttles? You'd fall out of the sky." "Bull! No one pulls out of that dive." Jack didn't argue. He just drew it on a napkin. The airflow pattern, the timing, the moment to hit power again. The squadron commander told him to shut up before someone tried it and killed themselves. But a few young pilots listened close. One of them scribbled the notes into his flight book. Within a week, they were all trying it. At first unofficially, quiet practice sessions at dawn, low-power dives, quick recoveries, fake shutters. Pilots called it the ghost stall. Others called it Garrison's bluff. And it started to work. Enemy pilots trained to finish a stalling opponent would rush in too close. When the Lightning suddenly re-engaged, it reversed position like a whip. The hunter became the hunted. Within a month, kill ratios shifted. The 475th Fighter Group, once losing 3 men for every Zero, now held nearly even odds, sometimes better. Reports from other squadrons trickled in. Pilots whispered about the Kansas trick, though no one seemed to know who Kansas was. Survival rates jumped 20% in low-altitude dogfights. The Japanese radio intercepts began picking up frantic chatter. American planes, falling, then rising again. Ghost lightnings. They thought it was new technology, some secret Allied device. It wasn't. It was one man with a hunch and the nerve to try it. By mid-1944, the trick spread through the Pacific like wildfire, never officially acknowledged, always passed pilot to pilot in quiet hangars and smoke-filled tents. One flight instructor from the 433rd wrote in his diary, "They call it controlled stall training, but the kids don't know it started with a man who just wanted to live through one more mission." The Army Air Forces couldn't publicly teach it. Too dangerous, they said, too easy to misjudge, to actually stall and die. But the pilots knew. They'd rather risk death on their own terms than die following a manual written thousands of miles away. On the Japanese side, confusion reigned. Pilots who once bragged they could predict every American move now found themselves ambushed by planes that played dead, then bit back. One captured Zero pilot later told interrogators, "It was terrifying. The enemy plane would fall. We would follow. Then it would rise again from below like a shark from the deep." That same summer, U.S. bombers began making it home more often. Escort losses dropped by a third. Morale returned to the jungle strips where hope had been bleeding out for years. Still, no one wrote it down. No report filed, no commendation issued. Jack Garrison flew another 12 missions that year. He was shot down once, rescued by a coast watcher, and sent back into combat within a month. He never once mentioned the fake stall in his debriefs. When asked how he'd survived 6-on-1 that day, he shrugged. "Guess I got lucky." But luck doesn't change doctrine. Men do. And somewhere between the rules and the chaos, that Kansas kid had found the gray zone where survival lives. By the time the war ended, newer planes, Hellcats, Corsairs, Mustangs, were faster and stronger. The old P-38s faded away, replaced by jets, but the tactics stayed. Buried in the manuals under new names: energy deception, low-power recovery, false stall approach. Every pilot who used it owed their life to a man they'd never met. The system never recorded his name, but the skies did. The war dragged on. The headlines moved to bigger stories: the Philippines, Iwo Jima, the B-29 raids, the atomic dawn. But in the forgotten corners of the Pacific, men like Jack Garrison kept flying, quietly, stubbornly, until there was nothing left to shoot at. By August 1945, the fighting stopped. The planes that survived were pushed to the edges of the airfields, paint blistered by sun, wings patched with stories no one would ever hear. Jack stood beside his battered Lightning one last time. The engines were cold. The metal smelled like rust and oil and ghosts. He ran a hand along the fuselage, the same spot he'd touched the night before that first fight. "Thanks, girl," he murmured. No reporters came, no medals. He was discharged that fall, just another lieutenant with good conduct and bad dreams. Back in Kansas, he returned to what he knew, flying low, slow, and alone over wheat fields. Crop dusting. Same steady hands, different sky. His neighbors called him Captain sometimes, out of respect. He never corrected them. He never told them about the time he fooled 6 aces and lived. He'd say things like, "You learn more by falling than by winning." People thought he was talking about farming. In official records, the fake stall never existed. Air Force historians later credited the shift in tactics to improved pilot training and a better understanding of aerodynamic energy. No mention of the man who risked his life testing it in a jungle sky. But every once in a while, decades later, a retired pilot at a reunion would mention the legend. The kid who cut his engines mid-fight. The ghost who fell, then killed 6. They'd argue if he was real or myth. Some swore they flew with him. Others said they only heard the story third hand, whispered in hangars, passed down like scripture. The few who remembered his name said it softly, like a prayer. Jack Garrison. One of those men, a mechanic named Hal Conway, told a journalist in the 1970s. He wasn't a hero type. He just had this look, like he'd already accepted he was dead, so he might as well try something impossible. When asked if he thought Jack survived the war, Conway just nodded. Yeah, but I think part of him stayed up there. Every time I hear an engine cut out, I can still feel that silence before he brought it roaring back. Years later, when the Air Force declassified old mission reports, one entry stood out. January 14, 1944, Lightning II-3 engaged 6 enemy fighters, 4 confirmed destroyed, 1 probable. Pilot survived. No mechanical cause for power loss found. No mention of what he'd done. Just the line, "Pilot displayed exceptional initiative under pressure." That's all history ever gave him. But the maneuver lived on. In the Korean War, jet pilots practiced idle roll deception. In Vietnam, F-4s used energy bleed traps against MiGs. Different names, same idea. Pretend to die, then strike when they least expect it. They called it innovation. Jack would have called it common sense. The last photograph ever taken of him shows a sunburned man in his 40s standing beside a crop-dusting biplane. He's smiling, but his eyes look far away, fixed on something only he can see. The caption just reads, John Garrison, former Air Corps pilot, 1958. No medals on his chest, no plaque on a wall, just wind, dust, and sky. He died quietly in 1972, heart failure in his sleep. His obituary didn't mention the war at all. It only said he loved flying, and that he never met a storm he wouldn't chase. If you fly today, you still see traces of him in the manuals, those small lines that say, "Controlled throttle reduction may be used to induce pursuit overshoot." Engineers wrote it clinically, but pilots know what it means. It means someone, somewhere, risked everything to prove it. The ghosts of those men still live in the details, the throttle settings, the flap angles, the seconds that decide who comes home. When modern pilots practice engine-out maneuvers, they're reenacting a dead man's gamble. A man whose name isn't in the textbook, but whose courage is written between the lines. Sometimes, late in the day, when the air goes quiet and the sky burns orange, you can almost hear it. The sudden silence before the roar. That heartbeat of stillness where death and life share the same cockpit. That's the moment Jack mastered. He didn't win the war. He didn't change history. He just made sure a few more boys got to see another sunrise. That's all he ever wanted. If you stand at the edge of a Kansas wheat field in summer, you might still see a small plane drift low over the rows, wings shimmering in the heat. For a second, it might look like it's about to stall. Then the engines rise again, smooth and steady, lifting back into the light. Maybe that's just how the sky remembers him. The man who fell on purpose, so others could rise. Then, if this story hit you the way it hit us, tap like so, more people hear it. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Our audience runs from small-town mechanics to history teachers. And make sure you're subscribed so these names don't disappear.